A match burns roughly 8 seconds. A life lasts roughly 80 years. Here one moment and gone the next. If you're smart, you'll use that time wisely.
Hey everyone, welcome to Grace. You know, for a couple of months we've been looking at one of the most interesting books ever written. Bono of U2 said this about Ecclesiastes. He said, Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books. It's about a character who wants to find out why he's alive, why he was created. And he tries knowledge, and he tries wealth, and he tries experience. He tries everything. And Bono's not alone in his admiration for this book. Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, called Ecclesiastes the truest of all books. Thomas Wolfe described it as the highest flower of poetry, eloquence, and truth, and the greatest single piece of writing I have ever known. So if you've been here for this series, I hope you've had a glimpse of why this is such an important book. And as we said from the start, it's not an easy book. Like, it seems really dark at times. But when we understand that the author is looking at only what this lifetime has to offer. Like, if we're expecting our problems to be wrapped up in a neat little bow during just our years under the sun, we're going to be disappointed. Like, if we expect partying more to solve our problems, or more leisure, like less work and more fun, or the opposite, more work, like just throw yourself into your career and make something of yourself. Or if you have a really great family, or I need to get lots of thrills, or throw caution to the wind and have a bunch of sexual exploits, or substance raves, or just travel more. Like if your hope is in that stuff, it's not going to work. And I want to take you back to an important verse, one of Q's dark musings. It's back in chapter 6, verse 12. He says, "For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow?" That's a rhetorical question. Who knows what's good, he says. And it's his way of saying, nobody knows. And here's why. Because unless you know what your purpose is, unless you were created for a purpose by a creator, there is no way to judge whether or not how you're living is right or wrong. Now listen, chapter 6:12 that I just read is actually a restatement of chapter 1, verse 3, which I said all the way back in week 1 was the question that sets up the entire book of Ecclesiastes. That's where Q said, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun?" Remember, the word gain means profit. So what he's saying is, if this life under the sun is all there is, like, what difference does anything make after all of the toil? Like, if there's no meaning, if you're an accident with no purpose, if this life is all there is, then when you die, you decompose into the earth, and eventually all of civilization will burn up as the world is destroyed under the heat of the sun. That is the definition of insignificant. Nothing matters. And Q has been hammering this point. If this life is all there is, if this life under the sun is the beginning and the middle and the end of your story, then what do we gain? What is the good life? Who gets to decide the answer to that question? What is right? What is wrong? Who's to say what is valuable and what's true and what's beautiful? Who gets to decide these things if we're all just random collections of atoms hurtling on a ball through space? If life is an accident, there is no such thing as having value. An accident has no right or wrong way of being used. My wife runs a construction company. Some of you know this. And when they're out there pouring a concrete sidewalk, there's always some overflow of the liquid concrete that falls outside the form boards. And so when you come back to take the form boards off, you'll see these clumps of 5 pounds of misshapen concrete. What do you do with that? Well, you dispose of it. You break it up into smaller chunks. You try to bury it somewhere or whatever. If it was an accident, there's no right or wrong way to use it. But if she were to build something, like if she creates something for a use or a purpose, then there are automatically right and wrong ways to use that thing. She doesn't have to write them down. It's automatic. For example, something we used to tell our kids all the time is that chairs are not built to hold all your weight on 2 legs. Anybody who have kids who lean back on their chairs and balance at the dining room table? I've never bought a chair, by the way, that has a little instruction saying, tell your kids not to lean back on their chairs. No, the creator had a design, and that is a certain amount of weight can be held by all 4 legs together. And if you misuse that chair, you're breaking the rules. You're not honoring the designer. You're not honoring the design of the creator of that chair. It will lead to brokenness. It will lead to breakdown. So anything with a purpose has a right and a wrong way to use it. And if you ignore those rules, you will have brokenness. And so this whole case has been building since chapter 1. If the world is all there is, and if it's all an accident with no purpose, then everything under the sun is totally meaningless. And so we arrive today at the end, verses 9 through 14 of chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, and they provide us a mini commentary on the whole book. They explain why the teacher did what he did with this book, why he wrote what he wrote, and I'm very thankful when the Bible includes its own explanations. That's a good thing. And here's what we learn. We learn that he didn't write this book from an ivory tower. He didn't write this book shut away in a university library, pining over his whacked out ideas, thinking he was getting wiser and wiser, all the while just becoming crazier while his hair grew out. No, he looked at life, he experienced life, he studied people and situations and all of their randomness, and he captured for us the complexity and bewilderment of life on this earth. And he comes to the conclusion that human endeavor, human ambition, our need to find satisfaction in this world are all fleeting. We are a fallen people living in a fallen world, and Q wants us to feel all the weight of that. And the question remains, however, how do we respond in light of that truth? Should we despair? Should we give up hope? Should we become German nihilists? Should we abandon our faith? Should we abandon Christ, having now discovered that all of this is meaningless? The truth is that Q does have a particular application in mind, but he makes us wait until the very final verses of the very final chapter of his book. So my message today is entitled, Getting the Point. I want to read our text from Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 9 through 14. He says, besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads and like nails. Firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. Verse 12, my son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And so Q is bringing us to the point. Here's how I would summarize in today's big idea. The point of it all is to honor God and live life his way. See, the truth is that there is more to living than just what's under the sun. There is a bigger portrait being painted. You were created with purpose. Just like that chair with 4 legs didn't come with a warning label, but if you rock back on 2 legs for too long, it's going to break. The same is true with life. That's what the teacher has been reflecting on throughout his book. There is a way we were created to live. It's right here. This is the end of the matter, he says. This is the whole duty of man. Did you hear that? What is it? What is it that we were created to do? Fear God and keep his commandments. That's what it comes down to. That's the point we're supposed to be getting in this crazy, confusing, meandering, sometimes contradictory book. But before we unpack that for a moment, I want to reflect, as verses 9 through 12 do, on the power of words. Notice we get this little insight into how Q put together his book of wisdom. He weighed and he studied and uprightly arranged these proverbs with great care. But then verse 10 tells us the kind of words he used, that these words were meant to bring us. He said, the preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. And the words of the wise are like goads and like nails. His words were meant to bring us delight. Some of you have been reading along through Ecclesiastes and you're like, that's news to me. And yes, it seemed gloomy and pessimistic at times, but it was actually written to bring us pleasure, to bring us delight. We talked about this a little last week, but God is not a killjoy. He's not a grumpy old man. In fact, what comes to your mind when you think of God is the most important part of you. So Q gives us words of delight. And I hope you've delighted some in this book because it's beautiful. And guess what? It's beautiful because it's true. And by being true, it's beautiful. You that know your Creator, when you realize that his words will make you smile. So go to Song of Solomon next. The Bible doesn't provide us a list of do's and don'ts for marriage. It gives us poetry to express what it's like to be in love and to what it's like to make love. And it's delightful. And God never made bullet points about the Christian life. He never made 3 easy steps about following Jesus. That's something that we've done to try to bring meaning and application to God's word. But explaining how to follow God is less like a scientific pamphlet that puts everything into a neat list. And it's more like explaining how to fall in love. How would you explain to someone how to fall in love? There's not a first or a second or a third. It's kind of different for everyone. And there's an element of mystery there that defies explanation. And so he says he's given us words of delight and then words of truth. And then wise words, he says, that are like goads and nails. You know, the words of this book are like goads and nails. And some of you are like, yeah, that was more of my experience versus the delight thing. Goads, you see, were instruments employed by shepherds to keep animals walking straight. They were not like the beautiful shepherd staffs that we see in all the cute European pictures of Jesus with the staff that has the nice curl on the end where you could gently pick up the sheep if they got out of line. No, these staffs actually had sharp nails and spikes sticking out of them to poke and prod at the animals so that they were moving in the right direction. Those spikes and nails were one part of a rescue tool and one part of a guide by pain. Listen, this is a very important point. The only way for the animal to avoid pain was to go the way the shepherd wanted him to go. So yeah, the words of Ecclesiastes may have felt sharp and painful at times, but all the ways of God are for our good. So ask yourself this question. When is the last time you submitted to the Bible's teaching, even when you didn't like what it said? Like when it poked you? Have you obeyed something recently, even if you found it offensive? See, don't domesticate your Bible. Sometimes it pokes you with spikes to keep you on the right path. God gave us words, including the words in Ecclesiastes, because he loves us. God has given us words from him and about him for us. Jesus is introduced, by the way, in John 1:1 as the Word of God. It says, in the beginning was the Word, that's Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word, Jesus, was God. You see, the Word is powerful. Words are powerful. They can delight and they can bring truth and wisdom and guidance. And this passage is talking specifically about the words of the book of Ecclesiastes, but I want to use the opportunity to talk to us about the power of words. It's not just that words are powerful, but your words are powerful. There's another wisdom book that says it plainly. Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And so let's start with the positive first. Like your words, do you realize this? Your words can be used for incredible good. Like your words can impact a person's life. I'm sure you can look back at a time when a teacher or a parent or a counselor or a coach or a friend spoke some words into your life that changed things for you. Like we hang on positive words. Mark Twain once said, I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. There's a great man here at Grace named Doug Nelson. He's one of our elders. And his relatives are like the patriarchs of Grace Church. His dad and his uncles, they were part of the original leaders of Grace who led the church through our formative years. His family has been in leadership here for generations. And I know plenty of churches who have families like that. And those families can actually cause a lot of damage if they go off the rails. Like the family becomes the controlling voting bloc of the church, and they hold lots of churches hostage and hold churches back from their full potential. Doug is just the opposite. Whenever I see Doug, he grabs my face and he speaks life into me. He sends me dates by email of key benchmarks in the life of our church and even in the life of my own ministry. He sent me a note in the fall reminding me that October 24th was, whatever the year was the anniversary of my installation service at Grace. He recently, out of the blue, texted me a verse that he knows is very important to me, Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. What's he doing? He's speaking life. Positive words are powerful. But words can also cause great destruction. We know this. The words that you choose to speak can ruin your own life. It can ruin the lives of the people who are close to you. Some words take just seconds to say, but the damage of those words can take years to heal. There's an old story of a woman in a small village in 16th century Europe. She took every opportunity to spread rumors and innuendo around the town. She was a town gossip. Anytime there was a scandal, she spread the word. Anytime an opportunity to slander someone, she took the bait. Well, one day she started to feel guilty about her words, and so she went to the local priest to confess her sins. And as penance, the priest gave the woman a bizarre assignment. He told her to go home and to get a pillow and to bring it back to the top of the bell tower in the center of town, where she was to cut the pillow open and let all the feathers blow in the wind all over the countryside. And for 3 days in a row, he instructed her to do this same routine. And finally, on the 4th day, he made his point by giving one final assignment as part of her penance. He said, now, today I want you to go and pick up all the feathers. Of course, it was an impossible assignment, and that was exactly his point. Once you start using destructive words, you will never, ever again control or reel them back, all the negative consequences. But it's so easy to get caught up in negative words, isn't it? Like, you know how it goes. Did you hear about Sally? No, I didn't hear about Sally. You didn't? Well, I probably shouldn't say anything, which is just code for ask me and I'll tell you everything. Well, what about Sally? Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but since you asked, and then out it comes. Sally's upside down financially. Sally's 18-year-old kid is a coke addict. Sally sleeping in the wrong bed. Sally's got a gambling problem, whatever it is. And then you both shake your head in mock horror. Oh, such a shame. We'll need to pray for Sally. And you walk away, leaving Sally's reputation in a pile of ash, lit by the spark of your slanderous words. Have you ever been the subject or object of slander? I have many times. And there are few wounds that cut as deeply as being on the receiving end of false and damning stories. There's a helpful acrostic to remember if you're wondering if you should pass along that gossipy story about someone. It's the acrostic think, as in think before you speak. Just ask, is this thing I'm about to say, T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? And if it's not those things, then it shouldn't be said. Shut your mouth and move on. I talked to a guy one time who came to me and said, Pastor, I'm just a cusser, man. I just cuss all the time. But it's no big deal. God has bigger things to worry about. No, that's not true. Your words are important to God. The Bible says again and again, your words can open doors and close them. And mainly, your words are a clear reflection of what's already going on in your heart. The Bible says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. I want to say something to the men. Maybe you were raised by a father who used condescending words to raise you. That's a common story that I hear. Some of you may need to come to grips with the fact that in your adulthood, you've unintentionally carried on the tradition of hurting people with your words, without even wanting to or meaning to. And now your words have hurt people for years. It might actually horrify you to reflect on the damage that has been done to those you love by your words. The first step is to acknowledge that to God and to yourself and to cry out for his help. But then it also involves confessing that to those you've hurt, to your wife, to your children, just to say, listen, guys, I realize that I've said a lot of hurtful things to you guys over the years, and I am so sorry. You see, inviting God back into the equation is huge, because without him, you'll keep failing. You'll keep stumbling over this. Anyway, I thank you for providing us a little space today to consider the power of words, because he talks about it in these verses. And so after this little transitional phrase in verse 12, that's become the life motto of many a college student, much study is a weariness of the flesh. He gets us to the point. And the point of this section, the climax of the book, what he calls the end of the matter. This is the moment we have been waiting for. He says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Did you hear how comprehensive that is? It is my whole duty. It is the very thing I was created for. You see, we don't tend to think like that. This whole series was called, What is the Point? And so here's where we're finally asking and answering, what is the point of life? And Q has 2 points. The first is honor God with everything you've got. See, we compartmentalize our life. We have hopes and dreams and aims and ambitions. And in the midst of that, we think of our responsibilities to others and our spouses and children and parents and work colleagues and friends. And over here, I've got who I am at the gym. And over here, this is who I am with my group of friends. And this is who I am with this other group of friends. And this is who I am at work. And this is who I am at home. But the preacher reminds us that every single duty or responsibility that we have toward anyone or anything else in every area of our lives, we have first toward God, first and foremost before him. And he uses this phrase. He says, fear God. Fear God. It's a common command in the Bible that causes confusion these days because it's been drilled into us that fear is a bad thing. But he lines up with the Proverbs here, which says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. What does this mean to fear God? Well, in the Bible, the word fear can be used 2 ways. 1 John 4 says that there's a fear which leads to torment, which leads to punishment. It's a fear that it's scared of being hurt. To be afraid of being hurt means you're worried about yourself. You're almost self-absorbed. You're always afraid of a person or a circumstance or a situation because of pain to yourself. But he goes on to say, but perfect love drives out that kind of fear. That's a bad fear. But there's another kind of fear. That's a good fear. That Q is referencing here. It's the main way the Bible uses. And it's a fear as it relates to God. And it's something completely different, almost opposite to the other kind. In Proverbs 28:14, he says, happy is the one who fears the Lord always. And so there's a fear that brings happiness. Psalm 130 says, with you there is forgiveness so that you may be feared. So when we are forgiven, the outcome is fear. What does he mean? What is this kind of fear of God? Well, it's an inner condition of awe and amazement and wonder before the magnitude of the love and power and the greatness of God. See, the fear of God is not the fear of being hurt. It's when God looks so huge, so consequential, that you view him with total honor. See, we must fill our minds with the greatness of God's grace until our hearts leap into obedience. My concern is that we've made God so small, so friendly, that we've lost what it means to fear him, to honor him, to respect him, to revere him, to wonder before him. Way back in the day when my daughter Aiden was like 5 years old, she had her little cousin over and they were in the living room watching Barney on TV. Remember this creepy thing? I came into the room and Barney was on there, and he had a guest on that was a tiger. There was Barney and a tiger on the screen, and the tiger was singing a song that said, I look a little scary, but I'm not. Over and over again, I look a little scary, but I'm not. And I walked into the room, and I'm stunned. And I asked Aiden, I said, what animal is that, honey? And she says, it's a tiger. And I says, does that tiger look scary? And she, in the sweet little voice of a brainwashed member of this cult, said, a little, but he's not. And my mind fast forwarded to her as a teenager on the live safari ride at Disney. And before you know it, my little girl has jumped off the safari truck and is heading toward an open field of tigers, ferocious tigers everywhere, singing, they look a little scary, but they're not. And I was furious. And I thought, this is dangerous. These kids are being sold a bill of goods. That's not even close to reality. Tigers are dangerous. I mean, I get the whole idea of familiarizing kids with animals and making them not scared, but in an effort to make the animal accessible, they had declawed the tiger to a point where it didn't even resemble reality anymore. The tiger is a scary creature. They are not to be trifled with. Ask Siegfried and Roy. It didn't go down well for those guys. The song should be, I look a little scary. Well, because I'm a freaking tiger and I'll eat your face off if you get too close to me. We need to be really careful around tigers. And we've done the same thing with the God of the Bible. Has he been declawed? People say the God I believe in only loves. The God I believe in doesn't punish anyone. The God I believe in affirms me no matter what. Well, that may be the God you believe in, but that's not the God of the Bible. We must stand in wonder and honor and amazement and yes, fear before the one who holds our destiny in his hands and our very next breath in his hands. You see, our first and only job in this lifetime should be to please him first and to please him alone. Jesus affirmed this when he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? Without hesitation, he said, love God with all you've got. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Take everything you know about you and surrender it to everything you know about him. So what is the point of life? Well, first, it's to honor God with everything you've got. And then he says, and keep his commands. Another way to say it is to live your life his way. We need to be careful here. You don't obey the commands of God so that he will accept you. That won't work. There's not enough brownie points to be earned. Instead, you obey the commands of God because through Jesus, he has already accepted you. Those are two very different motives of obedience. One is trying to earn salvation in your own strength, and the other is trying to live your life in gratitude for what's been done for you. Those two different motives will lead into very completely different experiences and to completely different kinds of people. Jesus tells a parable in the New Testament, and his punchline is this. He says, here's a person who's a wise person. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them. He goes on that everyone who hears his words and doesn't do them will be like a foolish man. Lots of people hear the word of God. They know the teachings of the Bible. But the difference is those who are wise will do something about it. It's not enough to hear, to listen. It's not enough just to watch church services, to listen to podcasts, because he says hearing isn't the point. You can hear all the sermons you want, and you can still crash and burn when the storm comes. Your marriage will crash. Your finances will crash. You'll have a moral crash. The key is doing what Jesus says. Live your life his way, not your way. A lot of people talk about believing in Jesus. Yeah, I believe in Jesus. Yeah, I believe in Jesus. My question always is, but do you believe that he was right about stuff? Because guess what? He was right about everything. And if you believe that he's right about stuff, you'll start to do what he says. You'll start to live your life his way. It's not enough to hear his words. You have to do them. And so when it comes to deciding what school your kids are going to go to, or where to invest your money, or how to make your marriage work, or how to interact with your coworkers, like you will have hope and purpose in this life if you restructure your decisions around what God says. How is the Spirit leading you? Why? Because he's right about stuff. He knows how you're supposed to function, how the world is supposed to function, and he wants you to be deeply satisfied. And so when he comes along and says things like, love your enemies and serve the poor and seek first my kingdom and everything else will be added to you, you do it. Not because it's going to bring you a thrill in the moment, but because you don't just want to chase the wind. You want a life that leaves you with peace and true and lasting joy. I mean, some of you need to just go ahead and give the Christian life a test drive, will you? Let's get that baby out on the open road and see how she drives. Some of you have been coming to church for a long time, and you've never actually tried out the Christian life. You see, you can hear the words, God is faithful, 1,000 times. A lot of people have. And you can read the words, God is faithful, in 100 books, and a lot of people have. But you will only come to know it down to your guts that God is faithful when you test it out in your real life. See, most spiritual growth doesn't come through a class or a church service. Those can help to shape our thoughts and beliefs and motivate you to change. But most growth doesn't happen there. In my experience, spiritual growth comes as a result of God putting us in need to know and need to grow situations. Need to know moments happen when we find ourselves in a predicament where we need to know God's viewpoint on an issue we've never dealt with before. An ethical issue at work. Everyone else is snickering and winking at something that you think is immoral. Or maybe one of your kids has found their way into an unusual group of friends and you're wondering, what does God have to say about how to handle this situation? And need to grow moments are similar, but they're usually accompanied by a tough trial or a challenging experience. It may be a new job with a boss who's a jerk, or a rough stretch of personal financial mess, or the pain of a broken heart. No matter what it is, it calls for a deeper and more obedient walk with God. This is also why Christian community is so important, guys. Because we always have good intentions in these situations. But being in biblical community gets us around people who will help to put our good intentions on the calendar. Living life this way, you see, is what makes the difference. This is the only path out of the meaningless existence that Q is talking about. Life is a mist. It's a vapor. Everything we do will float away into oblivion. And he closes by saying, there are no secrets with God. Everything will be exposed. You know, one of the hardest things about Ecclesiastes is letting it instruct us that there are no immediate answers for some things in this life. There is ultimately only one answer. God will put it right. Verse 14 says, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And we need to spend this life preparing to meet him. Like that day is going to come. And this sorry, fallen world where so many horrible things happen, and we read about them in the paper and online every day. We shake our heads and we wonder, can they ever be redeemed? Like, will there ever be justice? Well, one day there will. The Ancient of Days is going to take his seat. There is a throne, and it will be occupied. And God is going to set things right. And here's our hope. When Jesus came the first time, he didn't come to bring judgment. He came to take it. He paid our penalty so that we could get his presence and his love and new life. And the good news of the gospel declares that the great judge of the universe was willing to step off his throne, take off his robe, leave his judgment seat, and instead stand in judgment for us. The Bible is clear that in this time where we sit between his first coming and his second coming, we all need to make a decision about Jesus. And I want to invite you to do that today. Q says the only way to escape the vanity of vanities is to honor God with everything we've got and to live our lives his way. Every decision starts by taking a step. Maybe one you've never taken before. The New Testament book Hebrews 3:12 says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in your rebellion. So your host is going to come now and tell you what that looks like, what that step looks like. I pray that you've appreciated Ecclesiastes. I love you guys. Some of you, it's time to take that step today. God bless.